Injury.
Injury. Good one. Yeah. What else?
Guarding.
Guarding. Yes. So trauma is. Do you all find it to be a buzzword these days? Yeah. So in one way, that's a good thing because it's getting a lot more conversation and more in the public domain. And then I think it can also be minimized because of that too. So it's a both and. You all, I would imagine, have a pretty holistic view of the human experience, that our mind and our bodies all go together, and how our mind impacts us impacts how our body impacts us, and vice versa. And one of the things that happens neurologically, well, let me say what the definition of trauma is. There's different definitions, but overall is an overwhelming experience, either psychologically or physically, that you either witness or experience where you fear for your life or for major injury. But there's also chronic trauma as well as acute trauma. So acute trauma would be like a car accident. That's an acute experience that happens unexpected, and you suffer trauma. Chronic trauma is trauma that happens over the course of a period of time. So a lot of people who have inadequate care growing up suffer what's known as chronic trauma. It's also been called developmental trauma disorder, which was possibly going to be in the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Manual of Statistical. Anyway, it was possibly going to be in the psychiatric diagnosis book, but it didn't make it. But a lot of clinicians work with that thought that when there isn't good attachment and good care for children as they're growing up, they develop a traumatized nervous system because they're always on high alert. They're always using more cortisol than you would if you were able to relax. And so your adrenal system gets out of whack. And then, as this person said, guarding, one of the things we talk about with complex PTSD is people who have suffered either acute or chronic trauma develop a way to keep their muscles tense all the time on armoring, and so one of the things as body workers, practitioners, is you're coming up against that body armoring. And so how are you going to help your client to be able to start to begin to let down their guard, so maybe that the work you're doing is more effective? And then the other thing I think about for each of you is, how is the energy your client's bringing into the room affecting you? How many of you are familiar with the term trigger or triggering? Yeah, so
Like a flashback in this situation, yeah.
And a lot of times when we're triggered, we're unconscious of being triggered. All of a sudden we just know we don't feel so good, or we kind of want to leave, or maybe we sort of dissociate, or maybe we tense our muscles tighter. And so that can happen to people you work with as things in the therapeutic process unconsciously remind them of things that have happened to them that have been traumatic. Or vice versa, something about interacting with the person may remind you of something that's been traumatic for you. So one of the things that's really important for those who provide care for traumatized people is to be providing care for themselves. So what does anybody think about self-care? Is that much of a topic here?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I have to recharge my batteries. I even do more relaxation technique. My muscles will show up with the trigger point. trigger point, not
Yeah.
trigger.
Yeah.
And I'll feel headaches, but my headaches are chronic. They're chronic migraines, so it's very likely to be a chronic stressor under the surface. So massage for me keeps me level-headed. I feel like the world isn't bearing down on me so much. I don't have to be so reactive to the world. And when I receive relaxation massage, it doesn't mean I don't need to explore why my body goes there.
Yes.
But for me, I have to have the relaxation massage to function, really.
Yes.
And if it wasn't that, maybe it's meditation. But the massage has been what has worked for me.
Yes.
To a degree.
Yes. Yes. It's and there everything that helps is so important when we're trying to live as healthy as possible and with as much satisfaction as possible. So massage, craniosacral, yoga, meditation, psychotherapy are all things that can work together like a kaleidoscope of health, as well as I'm sure many other things. And that reminds me, I have a couple of handouts I was going to give y'all.
And while you're doing that,
Yeah.
some examples, I think given a little bit more help, I think we can come up with some examples of when we can't be the clinician, we can't be the diagnostician, but what interfaces will we see somebody have an emotional flashback or have a trigger? Would be at the front desk, might be when you're trying to schedule an appointment and the person's brain blood flow is over in relaxation response. And you're aiming to schedule an appointment, but there's a little bit of scheduling complexity. The person's not going to say, I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
They're a human. And they might not even know that that's part of what gets them so nervous at the front desk. But if the front desk is sitting here watching this us talk, you can say, wow, I get it. That calendar situation at this moment might really be difficult for them. I wonder if there's something else I could do to help them continue the relaxation response, and we'll get them scheduled a different way. Another I can think of is you go to start a treatment and the person told you that they wanted you to work with their abdomen because their friend said that you're going to have this sense of breathing and peace, but they're not able to go there when it starts, and they'll change the subject, or they'll get very antsy, or say, how about my foot? So looking to you for perhaps some behaviors that we may pick up, or to be mindful that this is an uncomfortable emotional situation for this person. They may not know why, but how is it that the person, through just experiencing a safe space with us, they may be able to get to that next place of going, wow, I wonder why I got so upset, and to open up to us. But we need to have some openers for them to know they can go there.
Yes. Yeah, and one of the things I feel like you're talking about is framing, which when I've been here, I think you guys do a good job of framing, okay, this is how it works and this is how it's going to happen. And one thing that can really help with trauma is framing. Like, so you create a verbal safe space. And so things feel defined and the person knows what to expect. And that, I think, is one way to drop down the possibility of the person being triggered. And another thing is, one of the ways I like to think about it when each of you are working with a person is you're listening to yourself as you're listening to their body. And so the information that you are getting inside of yourself is informing you not only about yourself but about the person you're working on. So as you're able to translate that into however you're doing the body work, or in whatever words you might use, that can open up more space for you and the person you're working with. And that it takes practice to to do that shuttling between the concrete dynamic that's going on and then what you're picking up on, simply because you're a human being with mirror neurons and a limbic system. And so we're all always gathering tremendous amounts of information from each other that we can use in the work.
I'm relating a little bit to when I go into a treatment room, or let's say a client walks in and I look a little fearful, and they interpret it as aggression, and the interaction just goes from there. So kind of in that mindset, that model. So if I'm in a session, I never really think about it, mirror neurons, you're right. So I'm in a session, if I get fearful, I think I didn't leave my crap outside the door. So it's possible, if I can quiet my own mind and my own business, that I picked it up because the person had a hard sense of that thoracic. We know verbally, we know that you can wear a shell. We know what it feels like, but then I don't always know what to do with that information to help that person feel safe. I can help them and have a good session. They're not going to feel like they have to fight me afterward. But some of those more subtleties of picking up, wow, maybe I had negative self-thoughts because of this feeling, this hardness in that person's back, and it really, what do I do with it? If I'm not going to say, well, my negative self-thoughts are because you have a hard shell on your back. But I take that information and I go, is there any place to help that person?
Right. So probably yes. One, if it's a new client, right, you're not going to have as much information or as much rapport. Like if it's a client that you periodically chat with during the session, or you guys communicate about what's going on with the work, then that might be like, you might say, I'm just wondering what you might be feeling right now, or I'm wondering if something tensed up for you, or something not judgmental, but some way to open up space. One of the things that can bring anxiety down is simply talking about what is actually in the room. So to be curious with them. If it isn't somebody that you feel like you can be verbally curious, I imagine you know how to be curious with the way you're working on their body. So I would wonder about stepping back mentally, emotionally, and thinking, how can I be curious with their body if it isn't safe to be curious verbally for them or for you for whatever reason. So in psychotherapy, one of the main tools is curiosity, is authentic curiosity. And if you can approach each person you're working on with authentic curiosity, I think that opens up space. Does it, that help?
Yeah, and if I might just point out, Barbara, I think you come across a lot with your clients with authentic curiosity, how you ask questions. Is it anything you can share and how you approach? I'm noticing something here. Is there? I could be wrong.
No, I appreciate that. It's putting it into words is kind of tough.
I'll tell you how I relate with the headaches. To bring people to saying, let me share with you how and I'm putting words in your mouth, but let me share with you how I approach headaches. I always work with the arms, and my last recollection has something to do with draining the energy. So that's where I'm relating to this.
I definitely do a lot of the framing, where I'll explain my approach and what's going to happen in the session. I think I just learned in school to try to let them know that I'm there for them.
Yeah.
So that I'm not bringing any of my stuff in. It's to the best of my ability, and we can't all just not be bring our own stuff. But I don't know that I can put it into a verbal. It's just creating as much of a safe
Yes.
space as possible,
Yes.
being curious, being
Yes.
present.
Mm-hmm.
Presence is a really
Yes.
big part of it, and trying to guide. So for me, if I feel that armoring, I'm gonna just have them breathe
Mm-hmm.
and bring them into their own
Mhm.
body,
Mm-hmm.
and if that exhale, if it does have them relax, we'll say, did you feel how that big exhale helped your muscles
Mhm.
let go? So
Mm-hmm.
really bringing them into just the
Mhm.
experience that
Yes.
they're having, and that it is a nurturing one.
Yes.
And so
Mhm.
just kind of reinforcing the positive aspects.
Yes.
And then just, I use a lot of, like descriptive stuff that everybody can relate to. So you liked this one. If someone's guarding, I'll say, imagine that you're the Tin Man and I've just put the oil can here
Uh-huh.
and here and
Uh-huh.
here, and everyone can feel that.
Yes.
You know, they get that mental image
Yes.
of him having the oil
Yes.
can, and suddenly they can mirror that.
Uh-huh.
And so I try to use a lot of words like that that are not about them. It's
Mhm.
more about bringing them, like I say, imagine your muscles are like caramel and it's melting and then sagging under
Yes.
its own weight.
Yes.
So I think that might bring them out of the negative experience,
Mhm.
and they can kind of
Mm-hmm.
just, that's a universal
Harmony.
thing
Yes.
that's also positive, and
Yes.
then they can feel that they have the ability to let go,
Yes.
and but all of that in as much of a safe space as I can.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is that
Yeah, it's like sending messages that you can, doesn't have to.
Mhm.
You can.
Mm-hmm.
and people, I think, who've had chronic trauma, to my understanding from listening to their stories and stuff, that guarding
Yeah.
is on the present.
Yes.
But then I won't necessarily say, I think you've had a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
You know, I can
Right.
tell by your muscles
Yeah.
that you had terrible stuff happen
Uh-huh.
to you in your childhood. But, but you can. You know, but you don't share that part of you. You just create the safe space without bringing that into it at all. But I'll positively reinforce. I'll be like, you know, a lot of people can't let go, but our bodies know how to remember what that's like.
Yes.
And you know, our bodies, and so when they have those little tiny
Mhm.
successes, I'll
Mhm.
just remind them and say, see, you know, you're,
Uh-huh.
because they'll often beat them, so they'll often have negative,
Right.
and say, I can't let go, I
Yeah.
can't, I'm terrible at this, I'm
Yeah.
terrible at this.
Yeah.
And so I'll say, see, you know,
Mhm.
that's, you totally did it,
Mhm.
you got this.
Mhm.
And so kind of positively
Yes.
reinforce that as
Yes.
well.
And that's lovely. And one of the things that you brought up is the power of metaphor. We humans respond really powerful to metaphors that we can relate to. And so using like the oil can and all, like that clicks for most people. And then it has an impact on our body, not just in our brain.
Just one other
Yes.
thing, I never use the word, I'll never tell them to relax,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a verb, but it's an unspecified one.
Mm-hmm.
So they go like, I should do something,
Yeah.
but I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And that's why I try to like be more guided, just relax, you know, being told like, you should relax. They're like, I don't know how.
Right.
I don't know what that
Looks like, or they have no
Yes.
muscle memory
Right.
for that experience.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And one of the ways I think for people to want to come back is if they start having that muscle memory of, oh, that felt good, I feel relaxed. They're like, I'd like to feel that again. And then hopefully they're going to be able to start bringing that into their life, not only in sessions, but at other times. And I want to go ahead and just look at this since we passed it out, and then I want to talk a little bit more about self-care. This is just a little chart sort of showing the flow of the process of trauma. It overwhelms the physical and psychological coping skills. And so one of the reasons it does that is when we suffer a trauma, the part of our brain called Broca's area is where we store language, and it gets disconnected from the other parts of our brain, and so we don't make a story out of what happened. And every single human being needs to be able to have a beginning, a middle, and an end for traumatic events to begin to be integrated into their body. And so what happens is the trauma gets isolated in a part of the brain that isn't connected to language, and so it gets expressed somatically in your body or through self-medicating by using substances to help you relax, or through aggression, a lot of different a lot of people are misdiagnosed with different sorts of psychological disorders that are trauma-based because of their response to the trauma. And what's the time frame, Laura? When would you like me to be?
To quarter to
Okay. So
1:45.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And then so then what happens with trauma is we have a inborn response, either fight, flight, freeze, and then another one that the author Peter Walker talks about, which I'll lay this book out here about complex PTSD is the fawn response, which you may have heard that called codependent or people pleasing, or so it's the person that lives their life completely externally. Like, say you have a client that actually the whole time they're in there, they're just worried about you and how are you doing, and they aren't able to be with themselves at all. And that would be the fawn response to trauma. And then so numbing, hypervigilance, that might be one of the things that if a person's body has been violated, they might feel a lot of hypervigilance trying to receive care.
Yeah.
The massage.
They may dart their eyes around a lot, ask a ton of questions before they come in the door, research absolutely every little nook and cranny, and then they come in and they're checking the bathroom out, they're checking out the room, they don't know what you are, they ask that person I usually put in a category of, maybe. It might be a well-informed person as well, but there's certain amount of information when you come in that most of us know we're just going to have to learn as we go and trust enough that we can take care of ourselves when we come into if this place is unsafe, we can leave.
Yes.
But that person who's researching absolutely everything is trying to perfect their safe space before they get into it.
Yes. And so it's going to make their ability to receive the care much more difficult. And that's where unconditional positive regard is a term that's used with psychotherapy a lot. And so if you, regardless of your person's emotional state, if you can maintain unconditional positive regard rather than judging, that'll help open up the space, which is also a good thing. Current stressors can remind of the trauma, life events, lifestyle, which is the triggers we talked about. And then the painful emotional state that trauma leaves us in can lead to a retreat response, isolation, dissociation, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders, deliberate self-harm, or other types of harmful behavior. And one of the things, like, you guys might notice, you individuals, you guys, you people, you women, might notice that a person leaves their body during the massage. I don't know if you've had that experience. And in one way, that can be disorienting for the practitioner, because a lot of times when someone dissociates in your presence, same thing, because of our limbic system, we might be cued to dissociate, which just heightens the dissociation in the room. So that's when you might want to breathe for yourself, to feel yourself in your body. One way to get back in your body is to feel the floor, smell what you smell, see what you see, feel what you feel with your hands. So to get very sensate oriented, and as you can stay present, that'll help the person feel safer to stay present. There's different variations of this type of breathing, but one of the brief ways you can reunite with your body for yourself is you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds and you count it. Then you hold your breath for 4 seconds, and then you breathe out through your mouth for 8 seconds. And that, like, it's all, I think of it as rebooting your computer. It recalibrates you and puts your parasympathetic nervous system a little bit more in charge again, and your sympathetic nervous system is your fight, flight, or freeze. And it's also a good part of your nervous system. It helps you get things done. It's good stress. It gets you through the day. But if you can't shuttle between your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system, it's harder to stay present to yourself. So that breathing helps you get them back to communicating. You're relaxing and you're working, and you're relaxing and you're working. So that's just a way to be mindful and stay present. And then then another book, I think I'll go ahead and, this is also another great book. This is The Body Keeps the Score. Mm-hmm. And has anybody read it?
It's on my
your
purchase
to read
list.
list?
Yes.
Yes.
No, actually, it's in my queue to buy.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Great. So
Vanderkolk, yeah.
Yes.
Got some videos he has too that are, well, we don't, but on YouTube, yeah.
Yes. And he was a forerunner to really bringing awareness to the public and working with people with PTSD. He first started working with veterans of the Vietnam War, and it's his work and several of his colleagues that brought the awareness of people outside of a war environment also often are suffering from PTSD. So his work is really good. And then this is another book I thought about for you all. This is Trauma Stewardship, and this is about caring for yourself as a person who is a caregiver to people who have been traumatized. So it's about self-care and stewarding yourself as you work with people who have been traumatized. And then this book is called Trauma and Recovery, and this is sort of the quintessential first book that really covered aspects of trauma, both systemic social trauma as well as personal trauma. And it's also an excellent book about how to work with trauma. And I'll mention, she has something else I wanted to mention to y'all. Her name is Judith Herman, and she talks about 3 phases of recovery. And as you have different people come in, they'll be in different phases, and or they could be shifting in and out of all 3 phases during the whole session. So it's not a defined space, but you can sort of define it into 3 basic phases, recovery into 3 basic phases. The first one is safety and stabilization. So you may have clients that basically the main thing that needs to happen is that things feel stable and safe for their experience here. The next phase in psychotherapy is remembrance and mourning. And I can imagine that you would also have clients that are in this phase, and they may cry or grieve during the session because they actually have been able to let their body let down and begin the process of mourning their losses. A big part of recovering from trauma is being able to mourn your losses. And then the third phase that Judith Herman talks about is reconnection and integration. And reconnection is you reconnecting with your traumatic stories, and then you being able to reconnect with other people and feel safe in interpersonal relationships. And this is So that's what does anybody have questions so far? Yes.
As a person who's not yet diagnosed with or whatever, do they look crazy out there in the world?
No. So many people who suffer from PTSD or complex PTSD or just say a traumatic experience are extremely highly functioning.
How is it that they manage to function, and does it two things is I'm thinking like come up with these coping skills that
Yes.
ultimately could get you in trouble down the road but
Right.
help you now, like you make
Right.
up your own. If you weren't raised, if you were raised in a neglectful situation,
Yes.
a lot of children have to learn to parent themselves.
Yes.
So they'll come up with some rule that they make, but then life goes along just fine, and a life event happens, like they get married, they change their house, they go to college, and it's a lot of times you'll see some of these the complex trauma, they have to recover again during those life stages.
Yes.
And so then they'll figure out another way to layer on to survive. So
Yes.
they're not thriving, they're surviving, whichever
Right.
one that was.
Yes.
Perhaps a way to see that. So that's one thing. And all of us, every human being on this earth has suffered a trauma. Why is it some people end up in this situation where they're kind of spiraling into trouble, and maybe they
Yes.
end up in a relationship that may be mirroring something not so great,
Right.
or they end up with a disease of the immune system.
Right. An autoimmune
So why
disease.
is it that some are like, got this, and the others are kind of stuck in this murk?
Right. So, so we were talking about nature and nurture in part of the answer to this, and it's a complex answer. So part of it is literally temperament and the level of a resilience that a person happens to have genetically. But another big part of it is another book called Waking the Tiger by Peter Levine talks about this quite a bit. And if you have good support around the traumatic event, if you have the opportunity to tell the event and make sense of it very shortly after the event occurred, you are much more likely to integrate the event and have less long-lasting negative effects from the traumatic event. And so one of the things, like if any of you are parents, one of the things, like for your kids when something happens, is you begin to tell them the story in your best way that you can imagine the story happen for them, and then you listen to them tell the story, or you color the story, or you draw